이어지는 세션을 좀 진행하려고 하는데요. 이어지는 세션은 영상으로 준비를 했습니다. 이 세션에서는 가장 영향력 있는 시장조사 기관이죠. 글로벌 IDC 총괄 부사장을 모시고 작년 한 해 동안 팬데믹 상황을 쭉 겪으면서 IT 분야, 특히 클라우드 영역에서 어떠한 급격한 변화가 있었는지 인사이트를 얻을 수 있는 시간이 될 것 같습니다. 베리타스 솔루션 마케팅을 총괄하고 있는 리사 홀딩거 부사장과 IDC 그룹의 미셸 베일리 부사장이 디지털 트랜스포메이션을 위한 클라우드 데이터 관리 최적화 방안이라는 주제로 진행이 될 거고요. 국내에서는 좀처럼 접하기 어려운 다양한 분석 내용이 담겨 있기 때문에 글로벌 클라우드 현황을 좀 이해하시는데 많은 도움이 될 걸로 예상이 됩니다. 그럼 리사 홀딩거와 미셸 베일리를 영상으로 만나보시죠.
Hi, Michelle. It's so great to see you again. I'm so pleased that you were able to join us for this event.
Thanks, Lissa. It's great to see you as well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we brought you here because you're definitely an expert on the cloud and many other domain areas. So we really wanted to get your unique perspective on some of the things that we've been talking about today. And so want to kind of talk about at a high level some of the things that we're seeing relative to digital transformation, and then do a deeper dive on the state of the cloud, because of course that's one of the areas that you have focused on for years and continue to. So relative to digital transformation, what you probably heard us talk about this morning was that as the global pandemic hit last year, we really saw an acceleration in terms of customers move to digital, right? Because they needed to ensure business continuity, enable remote workforces at scale, institute telemedicine programs. Brick and mortar stores needed to keep the lights on and enable digital selling. So there's just so many use cases that we can cite where customers did this kind of rush to digital in order to be resilient. But what we also saw is that as a result, customers took what was previously perhaps planned to be a multi-year cloud journey and collapsed that into weeks or months, right? And so what ended up happening, at least this is what we're hearing from our customers in our space, is that it's creating this gap where, digital transformation has far exceeded IT's ability to efficiently and effectively manage their data and the risks associated with that. So we talked about that in a couple of other sessions. I did want to get kind of a third-party perspective on that to see in your conversations with customers and in your research, are you seeing a similar sentiment and trends?
Oh, yes. Everything you described is what we saw. And I love how you called it, I think, the rush to digital, which is exactly what we saw. It was like emergency spending in IT, right? We'd never really seen that before. Even in the 20 or so years I've been looking at the technology sector, we've never seen the type of investment that we saw starting really in March of last year. And then it continued actually throughout the entire year.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's every industry had to change their business model. And usually what you see in tech markets is, the technology comes along and it gets a little better and businesses change a little bit to accommodate it. And boom, there was no time for any of that. And so, the three things that we really saw change really quickly. One is obviously collaboration tools. We haven't seen the type of investment in email and collaboration since really Office 365 launched years ago.
Yep.
The second was around security. So the more we saw customers invest in these new models, the more they had to invest in security functions to accommodate that. And then the third really was around data and around data protection and disaster recovery and risk management. And, we can talk through that a little bit as we go through here. But, we were concerned, right? We didn't really know. Nobody really knew what the impacts were going to be. We were concerned there'd be a downturn in the economy. We were concerned that would lead to a pullback in spending. You're seeing an incredibly healthy technology market over the last really 5 years. And we saw the opposite. We actually saw more investment in technology. And I think this is a great testament to how embedded technology has become as part of the overall business, that, really businesses were able to keep themselves afloat, keep the doors open, make adjustments because of this switch over to digital capabilities. And we had been at that tipping point anyway before COVID hit. We saw roughly 50% of all infrastructure spend was going into physical assets like buildings and planes and trucks and cars, and the other 50% was going to digital. But this, of course, just put us all on a completely different path. And, it's been one of those things you always are constantly learning with the tech market. And it was another huge learning for me as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting going into this, there was a lot of concern about, employee productivity and how that would be impacted by this whole remote working phenomenon pervasively, right? And what we've seen actually, I think, is that employees have been able to be more productive, but the only way they are able to do that is through these collaboration tools like you and I are using today with Zoom. So with that in mind, let's shift a bit to the cloud. So one of the things that really enabled many customers to drive business continuity was the cloud, as we talked about. And so wanted to just discuss with you what you've seen in terms of a shift perhaps in buying behavior and the way customers are thinking about the cloud. And then also what is your outlook in terms of what the cloud adoption and dynamic might look like, 3 years out?
Great. Yeah. So there's no doubt about it. The last 10 years in tech have really been about this shift to cloud. And, what we knew even before the pandemic hit is it's a multi-cloud world. 95% of all customers have both public and private cloud capabilities on premise. And what we saw was a doubling in hybrid cloud technologies over the last year. So it's not that customers are necessarily looking for one solution when it comes to a cloud environment or a cloud architecture. They're going to have lots and lots of vendors and lots of different cloud architectures in place, and it's going to involve both their on-premises investments. It's going to involve those with third-party providers. They're going to continue to have more resource at the edge. And so we've seen this for a long time, that the application portfolio at a typical enterprise, it continues to grow. So we continue to see that the portfolio gets bigger. A lot of customers we work with tell us it's a 50% increase every 2 years.
Wow.
The other big change is how applications are being architected. So the days of monolithic applications being built where everything's in one place and it's all nicely connected with data and application, those are long over. Modular frameworks, microservices, those are really the default. Definitely, that's the default for the developer today. So customers think that in 2 years, about 45% of all their applications are going to be built with modular development frameworks. And then the resource shift, right? Resources that used to just live in customers' data centers, customers are telling us now they expect about 60% of their entire resource base is going to live outside their own data center. So it gives you an idea of this pie that's getting bigger, it's getting more complex. And what it means is that applications need to be able to talk to each other across those different environments, and so too does the data. And that's frankly something that we've seen over the last 2 years, just a huge amount of shifting of applications and data to the right place, whether that's public environments or whether it's private environments, whether the application is, something customers want to put in a low cost environment, whether it's something that they want to optimize around performance, whether they're looking for machine learning or AI capabilities. I mean, it's the churn that's happening in the application portfolio right now is at an all-time high. So
Yeah, there's a ton of disruption going on in this space, right? Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah.
It's and I think what the pandemic did was, for a lot of larger organizations that maybe have been holding back or they've been trying to take a prescriptive approach, it really knocked down a lot of barriers from a cultural perspective, either with staff that were on hand or management or even the architecture approach that they were taking. It really has led to a change from, I think, what we're going to see coming forward, which is having these business model changes requires a different type of IT portfolio going forward. And I think that's been the big shift that we've seen, apart from, of course, all the technological shifts that we've seen.
Yeah, totally agree. So Michelle, we've been talking a lot about kind of the various disruptions going on in the industry and that customers are facing. One of those being cloud, and what we're seeing is that, and I want to see if you're seeing the same trends with the customers that you talk to and in your body of research, is that customers are at various stages of their cloud journey, right? So some customers are just in the process of developing their kind of holistic cloud strategy and beginning to implement that, where other customers and in industries, perhaps like financial services, are a little farther along or much farther along. So when we look at that adoption curve and the operational maturity, just curious from IDC's perspective, what you're seeing, like what do those phases constitute? And what are some of the key design attributes that customers need to consider or are considering at each phase of the journey?
Yeah, a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. So there's no one customer, right? There's thousands of customers and everybody's in a different place. And actually, I think we have a slide that we can bring up here and show you. So we think about customers on these 4 phases, and at one end you've got customers that are still really just getting started with cloud. They're maybe still doing proof of concept testing. Then you've got another set of customers that primarily use cloud, public cloud, for development activities as part of their test and dev environment. And then you've got about half of everybody else that's doing something in production. And then we have those customers all the way to the right-hand side who are, they're broadly adopted cloud, right? They're all in on cloud, whether it's public or private. And it's very much a built-in part of their IT portfolio. So what we've always seen up until recently was that, as customers moved along that journey, they had very different requirements in terms of things they were investing in. And what we tended to see was that things like disaster recovery, we would usually see that on customers that were just getting started with cloud, because DR is such a great on-ramp for cloud, right? It's a really great way to get started when you don't have a lot of applications in a cloud environment. As customers moved along, you would tend to see that security becomes more important and application performance becomes more important. Governance becomes more important. And we obviously still do see that. I would say the one thing that was a surprise for us last year was just how ubiquitous the need for disaster recovery and backup became across every customer on their cloud journey. And I think it's a great example of how, when there are substantial changes from a business perspective, how that does sometimes rapidly become a change from a technology perspective. And of course, if you think, a lot of businesses, you've got employees working from home. They don't always necessarily have a backup capability that's tied to their home office. It's tied to a central office or a local office. That just drove a completely different need around data storage and data management. And we saw that very, very clearly in all of our data. And the other one was risk management, right? So as you invest more in things that you're not used to having around, you have to prioritize what those risks might be. And frankly, not a lot of customers had a lot of time to work through that overall risk management strategy. So what we tended to see was sometimes that came at the end, right? It's like, okay, we just went and bought this. What type of a risk have we just taken on? I actually think we're going to see longer term changes around that, particularly around the risk management strategy. I think that, again, it kind of forced a lot of companies to do things that weren't necessarily part of their plan, have forced them into a situation where now you've got to think about employees and customers in a different way in terms of how you have to interact with them. And, cloud is a change to risk. It's not necessarily better or worse. Sometimes it's just a change. And so, one of the things about cloud, again, that is ubiquitous is that the number one pull through with cloud has always been security. And we saw more of that, not less, last year. So typically for every dollar you spend on cloud, you're going to spend about 20 cents on security. That went up to almost 30 cents last year. Yeah, it was substantial. And then the other piece that changed really dramatically was a focus around governance and compliance. And so again, one of those concerns we'd had was that customers would have to go and make a lot of these emergency decisions and that they would open themselves up to a lot of risk. When in fact, what we're seeing is that customers are really catching up on that and putting in place a lot of strategies to mitigate what may have been something they wouldn't have ordinarily done. And, I think that that's something that I would like to see customers do more of as we go forward is take the learnings that they do have from this period of time that we went through last year,
Yeah.
codify it, operationalize it, and then you can automate it. And as you think about a really large global organization where you're going to have different compliance needs and different regulatory needs across many different offices, this is a really great opportunity, I think, to take that and put that policy into code and think about new automation techniques, not just around security, but around governance and compliance as well.
Yeah, and governance and compliance, it's not only just a cloud phenomenon. I mean, it just overall governance and compliance has become so much more, the need has become so much more acute with the implementation of GDPR and a number of other compliance and regulatory requirements that are really forcing customers to think more deeply about how they ensure that and how they do that cost effectively. That's one of the areas that we've been investing in heavily from a data protection perspective and data management perspective, because that is really important to customers. It's not one of those things perhaps you want to invest in, but you have to invest in it, right?
Absolutely. It's a must-have, right? So, of course, you'd just love to be able to invest in compute and storage and grow and, create all these features and functions that grow your business. But if, you've got things leaking out the back end and you've got bad actors coming into your environment, then that's no good either. So it is a balance. There's no doubt about it. And I think the other part that's interesting about what's just happened is that the more we go digital, the more that risk management approach has to involve tech. It just can't be about the business in general, right? It has to take on more of a technology focus as well.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's manual, which isn't with the explosion of data. That is absolutely not a tenable situation or even plausible, right? To be doing all this manual, it requires technology. Yeah,
it's too complex. It's too complex, and you'll end up just throwing people at the problem, and that may not even necessarily be the solution either.
Yeah. The other point back to you were talking about disaster and recovery becoming kind of more acute and at the forefront of customers' minds again. It's been there for a long time, but I think this unexpected pandemic has really shined a spotlight on the need to really think about customers' business continuity and resiliency strategies and ensuring they have a robust plan in place, and from a technology perspective as well as an operational plan in place. And so I think customers now, while there was a rush to just enable business continuity last year, now customers are retrenching and reassessing their plans and the IT investments that they need to make to ensure that going forward, should some unforeseen disaster or event happen, that they're more sufficiently prepared than perhaps they were last year when the pandemic hit.
Definitely. Yeah.
So that's great. I wanted to kind of shift gears a bit. You touched on it in a couple of your comments, but one of the things that we've been talking about in our industry, and certainly is at the forefront of customers' mind when you look at research, is automation tends to be one of the top things that CIOs are looking at for obvious reasons, right? They want IT to be driving kind of more value for the business as opposed to just keeping lights on. So, and they're trying to manage costs, particularly in light of some of the economic headwinds that we're seeing. So automation and operational simplicity is one way to drive down costs while also enabling agility and allowing IT to move at the pace of business as opposed to being the cog in the wheel, if you will. So that's been a trend that we've seen certainly over the course of the last 5 to 7 years. There's been a lot of buzz in our industry about that. But do you have any, like the model that you presented earlier regarding the cloud journey or the operational maturity, do you have anything similar that looks at automation and kind of the various phases of where customers are?
Yep. So, automation has been one of those things that has lagged. There's no doubt about it. And everybody wants to get there, but not everybody has the staff in place to be able to put it in. A lot of automation up until now, particularly around cloud, has been something that's been self-built. And, we actually saw private cloud was adopted for some of those reasons, right? Because
yes, absolutely.
That could build that internally. Of course, what we're seeing now is that the tools are getting so much better out into the marketplace, and every vendor you go to is going to have an automation strategy that they're going to want you to buy into. I actually think the part that was missing that that the pandemic has helped us with is thinking through, well, what are those compliance needs and what are those needs around governance, and to be able to think about putting those into code so that you can actually operationalize them and automate them going forward. If you start thinking about governance and compliance in the same way as you would think about software development, for example, you can start thinking about, as you make changes, you can turn them back, right? You can do revisions on what you would put in place. So it has pretty significant long-term consequences for thinking about true automation into customers' environments. I think of the phase that everybody's in right now is we're going to go through this period of optimization, right? So there are a lot of investments that customers made that they probably wouldn't have made if they didn't have to.
Yeah.
We're already seeing that in a lot of our data, a lot of pushback on contracts and renewals and pricing as part of that, and looking to get the best ROI out of contracts that you can. Definitely moving towards lowering complexity and driving simplicity. And you and I've talked before about how everybody's got a best of breed tool, right? There's a tool for everything in every customer's environment that does one thing.
Yeah.
I think we're definitely going to see some more shifts over to trading off. Well, maybe this thing doesn't do everything the way I've been doing it previously, but it's going to do a lot of things well for me, which will drive better automation throughout the environment. Cost management is the big one that we see for this year. There's no doubt about it. And the other one's observability, right? Everybody wants to be able to look across their entire portfolio. So if you think about, a lot of Fortune 2000 customers, they'll have 30% of their apps in a public environment and another 40%, say, in a private cloud, and then the rest of them in a sort of more traditional non-cloud environment. And then you cut that by, they're on-prem, they're with a third-party vendor. Some of them using modular frameworks, some of them using more monolithic models. It becomes a very complex environment quickly. And I've seen with large customers that the management tools piece is what slowed them down from having larger, more scalable cloud implementations in their environment, and really thinking through which tool is going to work where, and how they'll all talk to each other is the really
Yeah, I was just going to say that as you were talking, I think one of the key things is to ensure, as customers are thinking about the vendors that they're going to go with, that they're looking for vendors that are open and offer APIs that are able to integrate into their existing tool chains and business workflows, right? So that you can't just look at one domain independently, because that's not how you turn up a service. It's, a service is the combination of compute, storage, network, backup, the whole thing. And so you want to look at that workflow holistically and ensure that you're choosing a vendor that will allow you to plug that solution into a larger ecosystem. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, we actually saw a big shift in that over the last year. So, prior to that, I would say most developers, they'll interoperate different applications with workflow models, right? If then statements, and they have to think through all different permutations of how those things are going to work together. Last year, we saw a lot of growth around APIs. It's still not most customers, right? So APIs is still sort of in that 20% range in terms of how customers will plug applications together. But what we saw was that it went to 40% with the developers, right? And with their own platforms. So that tells us what's going to come over the next 2 to 3 years. So we know that APIs are going to be the preferred mode for being able to connect everything together. So you definitely want to work with vendors that have the APIs that you have in place that can help you maybe even build out your own API library. And the other piece that we have too is that not everybody wants to do the jobs that they did over the last 10 years. I think we have another slide on that, everybody wants to move to a place where, from a staff perspective, you are focused on forward planning and you are putting in place longer term plans, that you're not on this short term plan model. We've already seen, particularly in those larger customer environments with the enterprise, the emergence of this cloud center of excellence team that is optimizing across public and private clouds. And they tend to be applications folks, infrastructure folks, security professionals. And then we've even more recently seen the CTO office start to take on a much bigger role here in optimizing across everything, not just cloud, but non-cloud environments. And for customers that have been able to work on that plan means they're picking vendors for the long term. They're picking platforms they're going to move forward with. They're picking security platforms that they want to have in place. They're figuring out when they're going to bring different regions online and at what time that's going to happen. It's a much more orderly approach. And what it tells us is that cloud is mainstream, right? Cloud has now
Yeah.
just become part of that overall management and operational approach. So that's important. I think we see staff want to spend their time on the things that are going to give them longevity in their career. Security is clearly one of those areas. And the other one is around application optimization, right? We see that all the time as well now. So, having these skills around being able to drive better performance at an application or at a data level. Nobody wants to spend their time on break fix or
Keeping the lights on. Yeah.
keep the lights on, right? That you're much better off handing that off to somebody else, which is really why we've seen a lot of the growth in managed services and new cloud services over the last
Yes.
several years.
Yes, absolutely. So, Michelle, I think we're at the end of our session. I could spend all day talking to you. You have such great insights. But I did want to thank you for joining us today. It was very, very fruitful, a very constructive conversation. So really appreciate your time, as always.
Thank you. Hey, thank you, Lissa. I really enjoyed it as well. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the event today as well. So really appreciate the time. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, you can reach out to me as well. I'd be happy to take some of those.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. And yes, to all the viewers here, there's a lot of great content out there. There's more sessions following this one. So I hope you have the opportunity to go out and review all the great content. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Lissa. Thanks, everyone.
네, 작년 한 해 동안을 돌이켜보면 IDC 부사장께서 언급하신 대로 디지털 러시라는 말이 참 와닿는 것 같습니다. 팬데믹 이후에 IT 관련 지출이 긴급적으로 늘어나고 IT 분야에서 20년의 경력을 가지고 있는 베리타스의 담당자 분도 이런 투자 유형은 처음이다라고 말씀하실 정도니까요. 그러면 오늘 이 세션에 함께해주고 계신 여러분들이 몸담고 계신 회사에서도 코로나19와 관련된 많은 변화들을 겪으셨을 것 같습니다. 어떤 변화가 있었는지 설문 결과 한번 보시겠습니다. 질문은 이거였습니다. 코비드-19 이후에 귀사가 예년보다 확대 도입했거나 가장 관심을 두고 있다고 생각되는 항목에 체크해 주세요라는 질문에 퍼블릭 클라우드 도입 및 전환 계획 1번에 해당하죠. 핑크색으로 되어 있는데 이 부분에 많은 분들이 답변해 주셨고요. 아무래도 이번 컨퍼런스의 큰 주제가 클라우드이기 때문에 이와 관련돼서 관심이 많으신 분들이 참여하고 계신 것 같습니다. 그 다음에 세 항목이 좀 비등비등한데 보안 솔루션 투자 확대, 그리고 재해복구 및 백업의 투자, 그리고 비용 효율성 및 자동화를 위한 IT 투자 재평가 작업들에도 많은 분들이 선택을 해주셨습니다. 여러분들께서는 어떤 선택지를 골라주셨나요? 고르셨던 항목과 비교하면서 국내 기업이 관심을 두고 있는 IT 확대 방향에 대해서 간략하게나마 확인하시는 시간이 되셨기 바랍니다.